The jewel of the Amazon, Arena da Amazônia, the venue that hosted 4 matches for the 2014 World Cup. This stadium is located in Manaus, Brazil.
Manaus is the capital city of the state of Amazonas. With a population of more than 2 million, it is the most populous city of both the Brazilian state of Amazonas and the Amazon rainforest. The city was founded in 1669. It was elevated to a town in 1832 with the name of Manaus, an altered spelling of the indigenous peoples, and legally transformed into a city on October 24, 1848. Manaus is surrounded by a rainforest the size of France, Spain, Sweden, Greece, and Italy combined, and it's only reachable by airplane or boat. Manaus is a unique city that preserves many of the tribes of native Brazilians.
The stadium was strategically placed in Manaus in order to make the indigenous people of Brazil feel more involved and included in Brazil's modern culture. Construction for the stadium, which holds 42,000 people, began in 2010, shortly after Brazil won the bid to host the World Cup. By the time the construction was completed in 2014, $300 million had been spent and 3 lives had been lost. Even though so much money was spent to make the stadium, it was used a very small amount of times during the World Cup. World Cup events such as performances and only 4 games. Save for the rarest occasions, such as when Olympic women's soccer teams played there recently, this arena sits pretty much empty. In the first 5 months after the World Cup, the stadium was only used 11 times. The band Kiss was supposed to play at the stadium during their 2014 World Tour, but ended up skipping that stop of the tour.
There are multiple reasons this stadium is so underused. The first and possibly largest reason is that there isn't a soccer team from Brazil's first division in Manaus. The stadium was used a few times to host league matches between first division teams from outside of Manaus, but those matches have been few and far between. Another reason the stadium is underused is that renting the space quickly became too expensive for the local teams in Manaus, which couldn't make enough money from their games to sustain the high cost of the space. These local matches would only attract around 1,000 spectators per match.
3 workers died during the construction of the stadium. One of the workers died from a fall in 2013, and on the same day, another worker suffered a heart attack while working outdoors. These 2 deaths caused the construction to be delayed, and they put the construction of the stadium weeks behind schedule, and also added hundreds of thousands of dollars to the total cost of the stadium.
Erica Demencino, age 20, a native of Manaus, was asked if she ever visited the stadium. She wagged her hand. "I never go there," she said. "Never?" She shook her head. "Never. So much money was put into it, and we have such great needs. Schools, hospitals, every big public project is an excuse to steal money."
The poverty rate in the Amazonas state of Brazil is 7%, but 48% of those people live in Manaus. In addition, 15% of the population of Manaus live in slums or favelas. With bad living conditions for many, the city needs all the money it can get for renovating infrastructure and creating better living conditions. As well, the city's roads and transportation systems are subpar, if not to say the least. With so many problems, using so much money for the stadium is a questionable decision for the state.
Manaus still hasn't broke even on the cost of the stadium, having only made up around 3/4 of the debt the stadium created. This means that before the city of Manaus can put their focus into fixing their existing issues, they need to get out of the debt that the stadium created.
Unfortunately, over $300 million that could have gone to fixing infrastructure and creating better housing for citizens living in slums was wasted. But of course, there's still hope. Several ideas and possibilities remain. The stadium could be turned into affordable housing for citizens, helping the bad living condition problem and creating new shelter for people who need it. Another recent proposal, which would likely be less expensive than converting the stadium, is to move or add a new First Division soccer team to Manaus. This would help make up the money that was spent on the stadium by bringing new attention to the arena and the city. The only reason Manaus doesn't have a team yet are that team owners are concerned that players wouldn't want to play in the excessively humid climate in Manaus, and that travel from other teams to and from Manaus would be expensive for those teams. A professional team in Manaus would likely help make up some of the debt, but it likely won't last long. When teams from outside of Manaus played in the stadium, they weren't able to sell out, and while a hometown team would likely garner more interest, that interest would likely wane as time goes on, and the team would likely suffer the same fate as the attempts for local teams to play in the stadium.